Tokugawa gunners would do their damage. However, one of the big weaknesses of muskets in this era is that reloading times are very long, and according to the traditional account, Nobunaga invented this great technique to mitigate that in what is known as the three-shot volley. There would be units of arquebuses combined with 2 or 3 archers. While the arquebuses were reloading, the bowmen could cover that dead time. Because those would be staggered times, you get the effect of a rotating fire. And behind Nobunaga's gunners, he has troops who are equipped with pikes to get the rider off of the horse, who could then be attacked with swords or spears. The Takeda's typical tactic was to try to move around their opponent, encircle them, and then defeat them from all sides. Katsuyori was convinced that he could win this encounter, as did his followers. They had faced the Tokugawa before and had won this spectacular victory. Right on the eve of the battle, it's still fair to say that it could have gone either way.
The defeat could have been very damaging for Nobunaga's image around Japan. He's made a lot of enemies by the mid-1570s. If he loses, it could become a real rallying point for opposition to his rule.
When the two sides would clash in the morning, this would be one of the most decisive and landmark battles in Japanese history. On the morning of the battle, the Takeda move forward and take up an attack position on the ridgeline facing the Oda positions. Everything's silent except for the movement of horses. Katsuyori can see the Oda positions, but he's not real sure at this point exactly what he's facing. If you imagine you're one of the Takeda troops, you see the enemy in front of you, you charge ahead. You start to get hit with musket fire. And then arrow fire. Leaders are encouraging you on, and you get to the first line of obstacles, and there are these barricades that you have to maneuver around. Meanwhile, the gunfire is getting more intense. The arrows are starting to hit home. Your compatriots to your left and your right are getting hit. The only way to get through this is to get through these obstacles and engage with the enemy and go hand to hand.
Katsuyori just keeps sending troops forward. As long as he keeps up that frontal attack, his enveloping maneuver still has a chance of succeeding.
You have bullets and arrows flying all over the place. Smoke obscuring views, getting in your eyes. They get hit from the side with an onslaught of Oda foot soldiers coming out. With their spears, their pikes, Takeda are torn to shreds. This speaks to the fact that Nobunaga's plan was to suck them in and basically hold them in this kill zone. Katsuyori is unwilling at this point to give up, so he sends in the next wave. This happens 3, 4, 5 times, and it's tearing the Takeda up. This is pure slaughter.
as the day goes on, it becomes clearer and clearer to the Takeda clan retainers they're not going to win. And so, many of them start to fall back, to retreat. And this really is the most dangerous moment in any battle across human history. Because when one side turns and starts to run from the other, that's when the real killing starts.
Of course, Katsuyori doesn't want to retreat. He's committed to fighting or dying. But as his forces disintegrate around him, his subordinate commanders plead with him to escape until one of them puts him on his horse, shoves him north, and Katsuyori is able to get back to his own lands with a handful of his forces. Over the course of the battle, 10,000 soldiers of Katsuyori's are left dead on the battlefield. Many of the Takeda leadership, the generals that had served Shingen for so long, were lying dead with their troops. Nagashino is often seen as a watershed battle in global history because of Nobunaga's supposed technique of rotating volley fire. What's really impressive is Nobunaga's organization to develop this plan to effectively use obstacles in a way that modern armies train today, and put all this together into one plan designed to completely annihilate his enemy.
The Battle of Nagashino was a resounding success for Nobunaga and Ieyasu because it dealt this very severe blow to one of the three major remaining Eastern daimyo, and the one who was closest to Nobunaga's domains.
Katsuyori has been so psychologically traumatized by this event that this is really the last time he ventures out of his own territory in force.
It took another couple years to fully eliminate the Takeda, but the writing was on the wall, so to speak. They're never able to pose a serious threat to Nobunaga after Nagashino.
However, while this was a resounding victory for Ieyasu, success is undermined when he finds out that his own wife, Tsukiyama, has been plotting to betray him.
These letters were discovered. The story is that Nobunaga had inserted some spies into Ieyasu's household. This is totally credible. Everybody had spies in everybody's household, friend or foe. And the maid of Lady Tsukiyama, it is said, found these letters and passed them on to Oda Nobunaga.
証拠はあまりないわけです。そう言われてるという疑惑の範囲でしかないわけだけれどもですね。しかしこの問題を放置することはできないんですね。それで信長は家康に対してですね、この問題に対してはっきりけじめをつけろと。下がれ。
Tokugawa Ieyasu had to get rid of Lady Tsukiyama. So Ieyasu decided to expel her, but if she still survives, then she might have done something more.
Ieyasu takes it a step further. Ieyasu suspects his son might attempt to do what a respectful, loyal son is supposed to do, and avenge his mother. So, he orders his son to be placed under house arrest.
But nevertheless, under pressure from Nobunaga, Ieyasu was required to force his own son to commit suicide.
Nobunaga at this point was a very, very strong warlord, and Ieyasu had to do what he said. Also, Ieyasu needed to maintain that alliance. It was absolutely vital. So, no matter what he thought, if Nobunaga ordered him to execute his own son, he had to do so.
It was the most dreadful thing that he could have been asked to do, and it affected his relationship with Nobunaga for the rest of their days together.
The victory at Nagashino makes Nobunaga the most powerful warlord in the nation. Most of central Japan is now under his control. His dream of uniting all of the nation under his own banner is closer than ever. But it has come at a price. Increasingly paranoid, Nobunaga now sees enemies everywhere.
The betrayal by Lady Tsukuyama did nothing but add to the fears Nobunaga had of enemies all around him, which amounted almost to a paranoid feeling that everyone wanted rid of him.
Put yourself into Nobunaga's position once he realizes this. Anyone tilling a field, anyone walking down the streets, any one of the maids in his service could be preparing poison for a drink. It's a very sobering thought to realize that you are not safe.
In fact, there had been several attempts on Nobunaga's life. The attempted assassin came from the province of Iga. And Iga province was one of the smallest provinces in Sengoku, Japan.
For 150 years, these people had governed themselves, keeping out any and all intruders into their domain.
When they fought, they joined together in self-governing communes, almost as a guerrilla army. And as such, they had raided Nobunaga's lines of communication for several years. They were so good at these techniques of irregular warfare that this is what gave rise to the legends of the ninja of Iga. They proved to be a thorn in Oda Nobunaga's side.
They had to go, by any means necessary. Nobunaga could not permit them to exist, for the sake of his own reputation and the sake of his own security.
And it should have been a pushover. It turned out to be one of the most vicious and bloody campaigns of Nobunaga's career.
Fueled by a ruthless and maniacal ambition to conquer central Japan, Nobunaga has destroyed many enemies who have underestimated him. His vicious military campaigns to weaken the powerful Buddhist institutions have turned large swaths of the population against him. Even some of his own generals question their loyalty to Nobunaga. Undeterred, Nobunaga now targets a group of mountain rebels from the province of Iga, who refuse to accept his feudal rule.
so-called rebels of Iga had governed themselves, keeping out any and all intruders into their domain. These people were a mixture of lumberers and farmers, fishermen, and other rugged individuals who had chosen to eke out an existence on the mountainous coasts of Iga. They carved their lives out of the very living rock and were built from the bones of the land on which they lived. They knew the landscape better than anyone there and could wage what we now call guerrilla warfare against anyone who dared step foot in their domain.
They were so good at these techniques of irregular warfare, which after all were the only things at their disposal, that this is what gave rise to the legends of the ninja of Iga. The word ninja, which is so familiar to us nowadays, is essentially a modern reading of a Japanese expression that implies secrecy, and it's pronounced shinobi.
A good shinobi can turn their hand to most anything. Espionage, any form of intelligence gathering, and assassins.
Training would have begun from a very early age. But in addition to the normal martial arts, these would also include the techniques of preparing explosives and even, in some cases, poison.
Many women also trained as shinobi. In other words, they were trained to be spies, assassins, gatherers of information. They could infiltrate the target's household. They could hide in plain sight. They were trained to be able to fit into society, but to do so as shinobi operatives.
There was a female shinobi named Mochizuki Chiyome, and she was trained in the mountainside to approach men and then gather information. And if necessary, they sleep with them. Sometimes they even kill the people after getting information. So they were trained to be an assassin as well.
Whatever you like to call them, shinobi or ninja or rebels, these people had developed their art in their mountainous home of Iga for centuries. Hard times and hard stones breed hard men and women. These assassins, spies, and agents were not to be trifled with, because they could, for a few coins, do more than an entire army could.
And to add insult to injury, the Iga warriors continued to carry out their raids into Oda territory. They proved to be a thorn in Oda Nobunaga's side, and one he was determined to eradicate. Nobunaga's son, Oda Nobukatsu. Oda Nobukatsu decided to destroy them on his father's behalf.
Nobukatsu, of course, was in many ways overshadowed by his older brothers. Nobukatsu may have seen this as an opportunity to prove his value to his father, Nobunaga.
Oda Nobukatsu's plan was quite simple. He was going to enter Iga by 3 separate mountain passes, combine his forces, and destroy these peasants.
The more conventional Nobukatsu marched into Iga, thinking of these people as nothing more than backwoodsmen.
The men of Iga knew exactly where they would be and where the best places were for them to be attacked. As masters of guerrilla warfare, they were determined to turn the mountains of Iga into a weapon.
When the fighting started, Nobukatsu's forces tried to form into their blocks to return fire, but they didn't know who they were shooting. All the while, the Iga continually flowing backwards and forwards like a tide.
The scene was one of utter confusion.
This battle wasn't a battle, it was a rout. Without order, without a goal.
During the attack, one of Nobukatsu's senior generals was killed. It was utter humiliation for Oda Nobukatsu, so he ordered an immediate retreat. And on their way back into Ise, they were harassed for every inch of the way by the local people, who seized sticks and stones if they had no weapons, and inflicted them upon the desperate retreating soldiers.
The survivors' army retreating headlong, with no idea as to who or what was fighting them.
The campaign had been an unprecedented disaster.
If this defeat had gone unpunished, it may very well have led to greater rebellions against him. Katsu. Instead, however, his plan was to simply wipe Iga off the face of the map.
In 1581, Nobunaga chose 5 of his most experienced generals for a massive invasion of Iga from 5 different directions. Inhabitants of Iga were as defiant as they could be. However, the men of Iga were unable to do what they had done when Nobukatsu attacked. They hadn't the resources to ambush 5 separate armies. Nobunaga's army advanced, burning every village, every house that they came across. And killing anyone who took refuge.
This was indeed a David and Goliath situation, but this time Goliath was going to win. Man, woman, and child was put to the sword or the torch. It is even said that rather than allow loved ones to fall into enemy hands, eager soldiers would cull their own before killing themselves. Not just to protect the honor of their family, but to keep their secrets. This was genocide, the deliberate and systematic destruction of all life in Iga. Nobunaga had been humiliated beyond his ability to bear, and the entirety of the province would pay for it with their lives. Having successfully pacified Iga, Oda Nobunaga had reached, I think, the zenith of his power and authority. He was within an ace of unifying the entire country of Japan.
Not only had he defeated some of the greatest names in Japanese history, he had also asserted his power by building the greatest fortress that Japan had ever seen. This was the castle of Azuchi.
The 7-story keep of the castle was decorated in a way that was radically new. Each floor of the keep had a different set of allusions to gods or animals or powerful men. So as you went up in the keep, you had higher and higher level beings, so to speak. But at the very top, which was Nobunaga's own private room, there was nothing. Except a mirror, where he could look at his own countenance. Much like Alexander the Great had himself deified in the deserts of Egypt, there was belief that because Nobunaga had installed just this mirror, which was a traditional sign of the gods in Japan, that he thought of himself as a god.
He had become a bloody judge, signing through all classes and regions in Japan, carving out his own power. Following all his bloody slaughters, a number of individuals in Kyoto gave for him the